November 3rd, 1944. The rain had stopped 2 hours ago, but the mud never dried in Metz. Private First Class Daniel Hartley pressed his chest deeper into the wet earth, feeling the cold seep through his jacket as he trained his Springfield scope on the ruined factory 300 yards east. His spotter, Corporal James Monroe, lay motionless beside him, scanning a different sector with binoculars that fogged every 30 seconds. They had been in position since before dawn. 6 hours, not a single confirmed target. Then Monroe's body jerked, a wet sound. Hartley turned just in time to see his partner's helmet roll sideways, a dark hole where the temple had been. The shot had come from behind them, from a position Hartley had never even considered watching. He froze. His scope showed him 8 degrees of the world. 8 degrees. Everything else was darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, a German marksman was already cycling his bolt for a second shot. Hartley survived that morning only because the German's rifle jammed, a 1 in 1,000 malfunction. He crawled backward through the mud for 40 minutes, dragging Monroe's body, knowing that at any moment the shot would come, and there would be nothing he could do to stop it. When he finally reached friendly lines, his hands wouldn't stop shaking for 3 days. But something else happened in those 3 days, something that would change everything. If you're watching this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. This story is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming. The problem wasn't skill. American snipers in the European theater were well-trained, accurate, and disciplined. The problem was physics. The M1903 Springfield rifle was accurate to 800 yards with a skilled shooter. The 8-power unertl scope mounted on most sniper variants could identify targets at extreme range. But that scope had a fatal flaw, one that was getting American marksmen neutralized at an alarming rate throughout the fall of 1944. 8 degrees. That was the field of view. Imagine looking at the world through a drinking straw. You can see one small circle clearly. Everything else ceases to exist. German snipers had figured this out months earlier. They developed what intelligence reports called double position tactics. One German would present a visible target, drawing the American's attention and locking his scope in a single direction. A second German, positioned at a 90-degree angle, would then take the shot. The American never saw it coming. He couldn't see it coming. His optics made it physically impossible. The 5th Infantry Division had been hammering against Metz since September. The city straddled the Moselle River, its ancient fortifications updated with concrete and steel by German engineers who understood that holding Metz meant controlling the gateway to the Saar industrial region. General George Patton wanted the city. He wanted it badly. His Third Army had swept across France with a speed that surprised even the most optimistic planners. But Metz stopped him cold. The fortresses surrounding the city dated back to the Franco-Prussian War: Fort Driant, Fort Jeanne d'Arc, Fort Saint-Quentin, names that would become synonymous with bloody, grinding urban warfare. The Germans had garrisoned these positions with experienced troops who knew every firing angle, every covered approach, every spot where an American patrol would have to expose itself. And they had snipers, lots of them. The kill ratio in early November favored the Germans roughly 2-to-1. For every German marksman eliminated by American counter-sniper teams, 2 American snipers were being taken out of action. Some were eliminated outright. Others were wounded severely enough to require evacuation. A few simply broke, their nerves shattered by the knowledge that death could come from any direction at any moment, and they would never see it. Private First Class Michael Donovan arrived at the 5th Division's sniper section on November 1st. 22 years old. Farm kid from Montana who had grown up hunting elk in the Bitterroot Mountains. He had qualified expert with every rifle the Army issued and had been specifically requested for counter-sniper duty by a captain who had seen him put 5 rounds through the same hole at 400 yards during a demonstration. Donovan's first day in Metz was spent listening to veterans describe how their partners had been eliminated. The stories had a terrible sameness to them. Locked onto a target, taking the shot. The sound of a rifle from somewhere else. The wet impact. The long crawl back to safety. On November 2nd, Donovan witnessed his first partner's elimination. A sergeant named Williams, 12 years in the Army, father of 3, caught by a round that entered below his left ear while he was focused on a German position to the east. The shot had come from the north. Donovan spent 4 hours pinned down, unable to move, listening to Williams breathe his last, knowing that if he raised his head even an inch, the same fate awaited him. That night, Donovan couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Williams's face in the moment before the bullet struck. The concentration, the focus, the complete unawareness of the threat that was about to end everything. And he kept coming back to the same thought, the same impossible problem. The scope was supposed to be an advantage. Greater magnification meant greater precision. But that magnification came at a cost. You traded peripheral vision for clarity. You traded awareness for accuracy. What if there was a way to have both? The idea came to him at 0300 hours, sitting in a dugout that smelled like wet wool and cigarette smoke. He was looking at his shaving kit, a cheap mirror, maybe 4 inches by 6 inches, purchased at a PX in England 3 months earlier. The glass was starting to spot around the edges. The frame was bent. It was the most worthless piece of equipment he owned, unless it wasn't. Donovan spent the next 2 hours experimenting. He tried mounting the mirror on his helmet. Useless. The angle was wrong and the reflection caught light in ways that would give away his position. He tried holding it in his left hand while shooting. Better. But it required him to take his support hand off the rifle, destroying his stability. He tried attaching it to his rifle stock with bootlaces. Closer. The reflection gave him a view of what was behind him, but the image was small, distorted, hard to interpret quickly. Finally, he found the solution. He attached the mirror to the scope itself, angling it to show a wide field of view to his left and rear. The key was positioning. The mirror had to be far enough from his eye that it didn't obstruct the primary scope picture, but close enough that a quick flick of his gaze would show him what was happening outside his tunnel vision. It looked ridiculous. He knew it looked ridiculous. A shaving mirror taped to a precision rifle scope with medical bandages and electrical tape. If his sergeant had seen it, he would have been put on latrine duty for a month, possibly longer. But Donovan didn't care about protocol. He cared about survival. And he cared about something else, too, something he didn't admit to anyone at the time. He cared about revenge. Williams had been a good man. He had shown Donovan the ropes, shared his rations, told him about his kids back in Ohio. He deserved better than a bullet in the neck from an enemy he never saw. On November 3rd, Donovan took his modified rifle out for the first time. His new spotter was a corporal named Martinez, 20 years old, Mexican-American from El Paso, quiet and observant and deeply skeptical of the contraption attached to Donovan's scope. They set up in a bombed-out building overlooking a German-held intersection. Standard counter-sniper position, good cover, multiple escape routes, clear sight lines to likely enemy locations. Donovan settled into position, checked his field of fire, and began the long wait that defined sniper operations. For 3 hours, nothing happened. Martinez scanned the sector methodically, calling out potential targets. Donovan tracked each one, waiting for confirmation, waiting for movement that would indicate an actual threat rather than a dead body propped up as a decoy. Then, at 14:32 hours, the mirror caught movement. Donovan wasn't looking at it directly. He was focused through his scope on a window 400 yards east, where Martinez had spotted what might be a rifle barrel. But in his peripheral vision, in that cheap 4x6-inch shaving mirror, he saw a shape, a human shape, moving through rubble 300 yards to their left. a position that his scope couldn't show him, a position that would have been invisible without the mirror. He didn't panic. He didn't shift his primary focus. He simply said very quietly, "Left. 300. Moving." Martinez turned, acquired the target with his binoculars and confirmed. German sniper team, 2 men, setting up a flanking shot. They had maybe 30 seconds before the Germans were in position. Donovan made a decision. He shifted his rifle to the left, found the lead German in his scope, and took the shot. The distance was shorter than he preferred. The angle was awkward, but the round found its target. The German collapsed backward, his rifle clattering against stone. The second German dove for cover. Martinez was already tracking him. Within 45 seconds, both threats had been neutralized. Donovan and Martinez looked at each other. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. They both understood what had just happened. The mirror had shown them a threat they would never have seen otherwise. It had given them time to react. It had kept them alive. Over the next 6 hours, Donovan's team eliminated 4 more German snipers. Each engagement followed a similar pattern. Donovan would locate a target through his primary scope, then check the mirror for flanking threats. 3 times the mirror revealed Germans attempting to set up double position attacks. Each time, the coordination between Donovan and Martinez neutralized the threat before it could develop. By evening, word had spread through the sniper section. Something strange was happening with Donovan's team. They were surviving engagements that should have been fatal. They were eliminating Germans at a rate nobody had seen before. And they were doing it with a shaving mirror taped to a rifle scope. The reaction was what you might expect: skepticism, mockery. A few veterans called it the stupidest thing they had ever seen. One staff sergeant suggested that Donovan be reassigned to a supply unit before he got himself and everyone around him neutralized with his amateur modifications. But Sergeant Hayes saw something different. Hayes was 34 years old, career Army, survivor of North Africa and Sicily before Normandy. He had eliminated more Germans than anyone else in the division, and he had watched too many of his partners die because they couldn't see the shot that ended them. Hayes asked Donovan to demonstrate the technique. Donovan showed him the mirror setup, explained the angles, described how he used peripheral vision to monitor the reflection while maintaining primary focus through the scope. Hayes listened without interrupting. When Donovan finished, Hayes nodded once and said, "Show me again. Slower this time." That night, Hayes modified his own rifle. He used a different approach, a smaller mirror salvaged from a German vehicle mounted with wire instead of tape. But the principle was identical. Give the sniper eyes in the back of his head. On November 4th, both Donovan's team and Hayes' team conducted operations. 0 casualties. 8 confirmed German eliminations between them. If you're finding this story valuable, consider hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss the next chapter. The best is yet to come. By November 5th, 6 more rifles had been modified. Some snipers used shaving mirrors. Others used pieces of broken glass salvaged from bombed buildings. One used the reflective surface of a mess tin lid hammered flat and polished with gun oil. A farm kid from Iowa cut leather straps from a captured German gas mask case to mount his mirror. The methods varied wildly. The principle remained constant. The Germans noticed the change almost immediately. Intelligence reports from the second week of November mentioned unusual American sniper behaviors. Americans were engaging flanking positions they shouldn't have been able to see. They were counterattacking before German snipers could fire. They seemed somehow aware of threats outside their scope's field of view. German sniper commanders tried to adapt. They increased engagement distances, attacking from 600 to 800 yards instead of the 400 that had been standard. The theory was sound. At greater range, the mirrors would be useless for detecting movement, but they weren't. The mirrors showed movement regardless of distance. A shape is a shape whether it's 300 yards away or 800. The Germans were still being spotted. They were still being eliminated before their attacks could develop. Next, the Germans tried overwhelming American awareness through simultaneous attacks from multiple positions. 3 or 4 snipers would engage a single American team at the same time, hoping that even if 1 or 2 were spotted, the others would get their shots off. This failed too. American sniper teams using mirrors had begun working in coordinated pairs. One man watched forward through the primary scope. The other monitored the mirror, watching for flanking threats. They had effectively created 360-degree awareness. Nothing got past them. The statistics were undeniable. Before the mirror modification spread through the 5th Division's sniper section, the kill ratio favored Germans roughly 2-to-1. By November 12th, every sniper in the battalion had some form of mirror attached to their rifle. The kill ratio had reversed to 4-to-1 in favor of the Americans. More importantly, American sniper casualties dropped to near zero in engagements where mirror-equipped teams were operating. The modification wasn't just making American snipers more effective, it was keeping them alive. The technique spread through the European theater the way all successful innovations spread in combat, soldier to soldier, team to team, unit to unit. No official order mandated the modification. No Army manual described the proper method for attaching a mirror to a scope. It simply worked, and word traveled. By late November, sniper teams in the 90th Division had adopted mirrors. By early December, the technique had reached units fighting in the Hurtgen Forest. By January, it was being used across the entire Western Front. The formal acknowledgement came in January 1945, when an evaluation team from Aberdeen Proving Ground arrived in Metz. 3 officers and 2 civilian ballistics experts spent a week inspecting modified rifles, testing mirror configurations, and interviewing the snipers who had developed and refined the technique. Their conclusion was straightforward. The mirrors represented a significant survivability enhancement. They recommended immediate integration into sniper doctrine and suggested that future scope designs incorporate wider fields of view or built-in reflective systems. The official report, of course, credited the evaluation team with identifying the sniper visibility problem and developing the mirror solution. It made no mention of Donovan, Martinez, Hayes, or any of the other soldiers who had figured it out under fire. Sergeant Hayes tried to correct this. He wrote letters, he submitted after-action reports, he made sure Donovan's name appeared in every document he controlled. It didn't matter. The Army bureaucracy absorbed the innovation and erased its origins. By the time the war ended, the mirror trick was official doctrine. The men who created it were footnotes at best. But the soldiers remembered. Donovan survived the war. The mirror saved his life at least 6 times. 6 separate instances where he spotted German snipers trying to flank him through a 4-inch piece of glass that had cost 35 cents at a PX in Southampton. 6 times he eliminated them first. After the war, he returned to Montana and became a hunting guide. Sometimes, around campfires, he would tell clients about the mirror modification, about how a desperate sniper had figured out how to see threats he wasn't looking at, about how that simple trick had saved lives. Martinez survived too. 14 confirmed eliminations to his credit. He went back to El Paso after the war, joined the Houston Police Department, and spent 30 years as a patrol officer. He never talked about the war to his colleagues, but his wife said he always kept a small mirror on his desk, said it helped him think. Hayes made it home as well. The mirror saved him 4 times by his own count. He went back to civilian life, tried farming for a while, eventually opened a hardware store in a small town in Kansas. He died in 1987. His obituary mentioned nothing about his military service except that he had served in World War II. The impact of the mirror trick extended far beyond the men who invented it. A historian who studied sniper operations in the European theater estimated that the modification probably saved between 40 and 60 American sniper lives between November 1944 and May 1945. That's 40 to 60 men who went home to their families, who built lives and had children and grew old because of a shaving mirror. The broader implications reached even further. The principles discovered at Metz influenced sniper training and scope design through the Korean War, Vietnam, and beyond. Modern sniper scopes incorporate dramatically wider fields of view than their World War II predecessors, partly because of lessons learned from the mirror modification. Current counter-sniper doctrine emphasizes 360-degree awareness in ways that trace directly back to those November days when a few desperate soldiers figured out that the key to survival was seeing what you weren't looking at. The Battle of Metz itself ground on through November. The city finally fell on November 22nd, after weeks of house-to-house fighting that left thousands of casualties on both sides. The surrounding forts held out longer. Fort Dryant didn't surrender until December 4th. Fort Jeanne d'Arc lasted until December 13th. The German garrison fought with a tenacity that earned grudging respect from the Americans trying to root them out. But the sniper war within the larger battle had already been decided. By the second week of November, German sniper effectiveness around Metz had collapsed, not because the Germans were any less skilled, not because they had fewer rifles or worse positions, but because the Americans had found a way to see what shouldn't have been visible. A single innovation, improvised under fire, spreading through an army faster than any official order could have mandated it. There's a lesson in this story about how organizations adapt to challenges. The Army's official doctrine in November 1944 said nothing about mirrors. The training manuals emphasized proper scope technique, sector scanning, frequent position changes, all good advice. All insufficient against an enemy who had figured out how to exploit the fundamental limitation of magnified optics. The solution didn't come from headquarters. It didn't come from a research laboratory or a testing ground or a planning committee. It came from a 22-year-old farm kid from Montana who couldn't sleep after watching his partner die, who sat in a dugout at 3 a.m. staring at a cheap shaving mirror and thinking about how to see what the scope couldn't show him. That's how innovations actually happen in warfare, not through top-down directives, but through bottom-up improvisation, through soldiers facing impossible problems and finding solutions that nobody in authority had imagined, through word-of-mouth transmission that moves faster than official channels could ever approve. The mirror trick worked because it was simple, because any soldier could implement it with materials available in the field, because it didn't require authorization or specialized training or expensive equipment. A piece of glass, some tape or wire, 10 minutes of experimentation, and suddenly you could see what was going to get you eliminated before it happened. That simplicity was also its greatest vulnerability to official history. There was nothing proprietary about it, nothing that could be claimed as an institutional achievement. Nobody could write a technical report explaining the engineering principles behind taping a shaving mirror to a rifle scope. The best the Army could do was retroactively authorize the modification and incorporate it into training materials that never mentioned who had actually figured it out. Which is why stories like this matter, because the official histories get written by people who weren't there, by institutions that have reasons to credit themselves rather than individual soldiers, by bureaucracies that process innovations the way they process everything else, stripping away context and human agency until only the abstract principle remains. Michael Donovan deserved better than a footnote. Martinez and Hayes and the dozen other soldiers who refined and spread the mirror technique deserved recognition that they never received. Not because recognition would have changed their lives materially, but because knowing where innovations actually come from helps us understand how to foster them in the future. The next great battlefield innovation won't come from a defense contractor's laboratory. It will come from someone in the field, facing an impossible situation, finding a solution from whatever materials happen to be at hand. And if we're lucky, word will spread fast enough to save lives before the official channels even know there's a problem to solve. What happened in Metz in November 1944 was a small story within a vast war. Thousands of soldiers were engaged in the battle, hundreds of tanks and artillery pieces, enough ammunition to level a small country, and the innovation that arguably had the greatest impact on sniper operations came from a 4-inch mirror that cost 35 cents. There's something both humbling and inspiring about that. Humbling because it reminds us that all our sophisticated planning and expensive equipment can be trumped by a simple idea at the right moment. Inspiring because it shows what's possible when individuals are given the freedom to improvise, to experiment, to fail, and try again until they find something that works. The Germans never fully adapted to the mirror trick. They tried longer ranges, they tried simultaneous attacks, they tried countermeasures of their own, including mirrors. But by the time they understood what was happening, the damage was done. The kill ratio had reversed. The psychological advantage had shifted. German snipers around Metz were operating defensively for the first time, more worried about being spotted than about making their own eliminations. That psychological shift mattered more than the raw numbers. Sniper warfare is as much about intimidation as it is about elimination. A sniper who believes he can fire with impunity operates differently than one who knows he might be watched from angles he can't see. The mirror didn't just give American snipers better situational awareness, it fundamentally changed the nature of the engagement. It turned hunters into hunted. The fortresses around Metz eventually fell. The German army eventually retreated across the Rhine. The war eventually ended with Hitler's regime collapsing in on itself in the spring of 1945, and the men who had fought in the mud around Metz went home, carrying memories they would spend the rest of their lives trying to process. Some of them talked about what they had seen and done, most didn't. The war produced millions of stories, and only a tiny fraction ever got told. The mirror trick survived in oral tradition among veterans, passed down at reunions, and in memoirs that few people read. It surfaced occasionally in military histories as a curious anecdote, a footnote illustrating the resourcefulness of American soldiers. But the core truth of what happened, that a handful of desperate men facing an impossible situation found a way to turn physics against their enemy, that story deserves to be remembered. Not because it changed the outcome of the war, not because the men involved became famous, but because it represents something essential about human adaptability, about the capacity to look at a problem that seems unsolvable and find a solution anyway. Michael Donovan wasn't a genius. He was a scared kid who had just watched his friend die and couldn't stop thinking about how to prevent it from happening again. The mirror wasn't a brilliant invention. It was a desperate improvisation born from sleeplessness and grief, and the absolute refusal to accept that the situation was hopeless. That refusal is what separates the living from the dead in warfare. The willingness to keep thinking, keep trying, keep looking for angles that nobody else has considered. The German snipers around Metz were highly trained, well-equipped, and operating from prepared positions. They should have dominated. By every metric the Army used to evaluate sniper effectiveness, they should have maintained their 2-to-1 kill advantage indefinitely. They didn't. Because one American soldier looked at a shaving mirror and saw something other than his own reflection. He saw possibility. He saw survival. He saw a way to give himself and his fellow snipers eyes in the back of their heads. And that made all the difference. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Consider subscribing if you want more stories about the forgotten innovations and unsung heroes who shaped the history we think we know. Drop a comment below sharing which aspect of this story surprised you the most. Until next time, keep looking for the angles that nobody else has considered. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones that seem too simple to work. The war ended 80 years ago. The men who fought it are mostly gone now, their stories fading into the same obscurity that swallowed so many of their innovations. But the principle remains. When you face a problem that seems impossible, look around. The solution might be sitting right there, waiting to be seen differently. A 35-cent shaving mirror. 60 enemy snipers exposed. 3 days that changed everything. That's the power of thinking differently, under pressure. That's the lesson of Metz.